In a quiet, small town nestled in the American Midwest, a group of curious children spent their summer days playing near an old, abandoned barn on the outskirts of town. Sam, Emily, Jake, and Sophia often wandered the area, exploring forgotten corners of the community, unaware that their next adventure would change their lives forever. One warm afternoon, as they were digging near the edge of the barn's foundation, Sam's shovel struck something hard. When they unearthed it, they discovered a time capsule, one buried decades ago by soldiers from World War II. Inside the capsule were old letters, photographs, medals, and other mementos, each piece carefully preserved as a testament to a past long gone. As they sifted through the items, the children found a letter addressed to a soldier's beloved, filled with words of love, hope, and longing, offering them a glimpse into a world far removed from their own. Intrigued and eager to learn more, the children decided to embark on a journey to uncover the stories behind the time capsule and its forgotten owner, unaware that this simple discovery would lead them to a deeper understanding of sacrifice, love, and patriotism. With the time capsule now carefully tucked away in their hands, the group of children knew that their journey had only just begun. What had started as a simple exploration had quickly turned into a mission that carried a weight far heavier than they had ever imagined. Sam, always the leader, was the first to speak up. His voice filled with determination. "We need to find out who these soldiers were and get these things back to their families," he said, looking at the others. The others nodded in agreement, their expressions more serious than they had ever been before. Emily, whose sensitivity made her deeply connected to the stories of others, felt a tightness in her chest. She imagined the families these items belonged to, the parents, the children, the spouses, and wondered how they might feel after so many years to hear stories of their loved ones again. "We can't just keep these," she said softly. "They're not ours. They belong to people who loved them." Jake, who had always been skeptical and not one to easily buy into sentimentality, found himself unexpectedly moved by the letter Sam had read aloud. The soldier's words, filled with longing and hope, had shaken something inside him. He wasn't sure why, but something about it felt real, more real than anything else he'd ever felt. "I'll help," he said quietly, his usual sarcasm absent. "Let's find out who these people were. They deserve to be remembered." Sophia, the quietest of the group, nodded solemnly, her eyes scanning the photographs in her hands. She had always been the observer, the one who noticed the details others missed. "We can start at the local historical society," she suggested, her voice soft but firm. "They might have records or old news clippings about soldiers from the war. It's a place where people come to remember, right?" The children gathered their belongings and set off on their mission. Their first stop was the local historical society, a small, dusty building tucked away on the town's main street. Inside, the walls were lined with photographs, old maps, and books about the town's history. The curator, an elderly woman named Mrs. Parker, greeted them with a warm but curious smile. She listened intently as they explained their discovery of the time capsule and their desire to return the items to the soldiers' families. Mrs. Parker's eyes widened when they showed her the photographs. "These men," she said slowly, tracing the images with her finger, "they were part of a battalion that served during the war. A lot of them were from around here, but some of them went off to different parts of the country. Their families might still be here, or they might have moved away long ago." She pulled out a worn military registry from a shelf, flipping through it with surprising speed. "Here," she said, pointing to a page marked with the names of soldiers from the war. She ran her finger down the list until it stopped at one name. This one, James Sullivan. He was a local boy, but he died in combat overseas. His sister, Sarah Sullivan, lived in town for years. I haven't heard from her in decades, but she might still be out there. She used to run a small shop on Maple Street. The children exchanged looks of excitement and anticipation. This was the lead they had been hoping for. Mrs. Parker gave them directions to the old shop, now closed, but with an address listed in the town records. They thanked her and hurried on their way, the weight of their mission driving them forward. As they walked down Maple Street, the familiar sights of their town seemed different now, charged with meaning. The small buildings and quiet streets felt as though they held secrets, each corner potentially leading them closer to the families whose stories they were determined to uncover. They finally arrived at Sarah Sullivan's house, a quaint, ivy-covered home at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. The front porch was empty, the windows dark, but there was something about the house that made it clear that someone still lived there. With a deep breath, Sam stepped forward and rang the doorbell. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly woman with graying hair and a gentle smile. She looked at the children curiously, a glint of recognition in her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Sam spoke up, feeling the weight of the moment. "Are you Mrs. Sullivan? We found something that belongs to your brother, James Sullivan. He served in the war, and we think these items might be his." He held out the photograph and the letters, watching the woman's face closely. Sarah Sullivan's eyes softened as she took the photograph in her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly as she studied it, a tear slipping down her cheek. "James," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I haven't seen this in years. He was just a boy when he left. And I was so proud of him. But I never got to say goodbye." Her voice broke as she glanced at the children, her eyes full of gratitude. "How did you find this? How did you find me?" The children explained how they had come across the time capsule, how they had found the items buried near the old barn. Sarah listened intently, her expression a mix of sadness and relief. "I thought I had lost him forever," she said quietly. "But now it feels like a part of him has come back. Thank you. Thank you for bringing this to me." The children stood there, feeling the magnitude of what they had done. They had bridged the gap between the past and present, reconnecting a piece of history to a family that had long carried its pain in silence. The feeling of satisfaction and gratitude was overwhelming. They had found one family, but they knew there were more out there, more stories to uncover, more lives to honor. With Sarah's blessing, they continued their search, determined to find the other families, to return the remaining items, and to give each soldier the recognition and remembrance they deserved. The journey was far from over, but the children knew one thing for certain. They were not just uncovering old memories. They were making new ones, ones that would shape their lives forever. The next few weeks were filled with intense research, phone calls, and visits. The children's hearts raced with anticipation every time they made a new discovery. After finding Sarah Sullivan, they learned about more soldiers who had served with James, and they began reaching out to their families. But the journey was far from easy. Many of the families had moved away long ago, while others had passed on, leaving behind memories that were now hidden in the folds of time. Yet with each lead they followed, the children grew more determined. The deeper they dug, the more they realized how deeply these soldiers' lives had shaped the town and its people, and how important it was to honor their memories. One afternoon, as they were perusing the local newspaper archives, they stumbled across an article about John Mason, a World War II veteran who had recently retired from his post as the town's school janitor. The article mentioned that John had been awarded several medals for his service, but it was unclear whether any family members were still in the area. Excited about the prospect of finding another survivor from the war, the children decided to pay a visit to John's house, which was located on the outskirts of town. They made their way down a dusty dirt road, their hearts pounding in their chests. When they reached the small, weather-beaten house, they were greeted by the sight of a man sitting on the porch in a rocking chair, staring out at the horizon. His hair was gray, and his face was lined with age, but his eyes, sharp and clear, shone with a quiet strength. "Excuse me, sir," Sam called out, walking up the creaky wooden steps. The man turned, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied them. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gravelly from years of hard work and outdoor living. Sam hesitated for a moment, then spoke respectfully. "Are you Mr. John Mason? We've been researching soldiers who served during the war, and we found some things, letters and photos, that might belong to you." He handed John one of the photographs they had uncovered in the time capsule, a black and white image of a young man in a military uniform. John's expression shifted from curiosity to surprise, and then to something deeper, more emotional. His hands shook slightly as he took the photograph. "That's me," he said, his voice low. He studied the picture for a moment, lost in thought, before he looked up at the children, his face softening. "I haven't seen that in a long time." He paused, as if gathering his thoughts. "A lot of memories come rushing back when I look at that photo. I lost so many good men during the war. It was a hard time, but we all made it through together." The children watched him with a mixture of respect and awe. They had heard stories about the sacrifices of soldiers in history books, but to hear it firsthand from someone who had lived through it was a humbling experience. "Do you have any family?" Emily asked gently, noticing the sorrow in John's eyes. John nodded, though his smile was tinged with sadness. "My wife passed away a few years ago, and my son lives in another state. He's got a family of his own now. We don't talk much about the war. It's hard to bring up those memories, especially with him. But I carry the weight of those days with me every day." The children were struck by the weight of his words. They had been so focused on returning the items to the families of the fallen soldiers, but they hadn't considered the emotional toll on the veterans themselves, the ones who had survived, who lived with the memories, the guilt, and the pain of what they had seen and done. They felt a deep sense of empathy for John, understanding that his story was just as important as the soldiers who had died on the battlefield. "Do you want to see what we found?" Sam asked, his voice tentative but kind. John looked at the children, his eyes gleaming with appreciation. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'd like that very much." They handed him the letters they had found in the time capsule, and as John read each one, his face transformed with each passing word. The letters were filled with stories of soldiers who had fought side by side with him, men who had written to their families, expressing their hopes, their fears, and their love. Some had written about their longing to return home. Others had written about the courage it took to face each day in the midst of the horrors of war. John's hand trembled as he finished reading the last letter, and he wiped a tear from his eye. "Thank you," John whispered. "You have no idea how much this means to me. These men were my brothers, and I've carried their memories with me all these years. I never thought I'd see their faces again, or hear their voices in the words they wrote." His voice cracked slightly, but he smiled. "You've done something that means more than you'll ever know." The children sat in silence for a while, reflecting on the power of what they had just witnessed. They had come to return a piece of history, but in doing so, they had uncovered something much deeper. An understanding of the invisible scars that war leaves behind, the weight of loss that lingers long after the battle is over. As they left John's house, their hearts felt fuller and heavier. They had learned that the memories of those who had served were not just preserved in letters and photographs. They lived in the veterans who had returned, in the families who had waited, and in the generations that followed. The children knew their mission was far from over. There were more families to find, more veterans to meet, and more stories to uncover. But each encounter brought them closer to understanding the true meaning of sacrifice, courage, and the enduring power of memory. As the children's journey unfolded, they began to realize that they were not just uncovering pieces of history. They were reconnecting the past and present in ways they hadn't expected. Each encounter with a veteran or family member brought them closer to understanding the enduring impact of war, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds that tied these soldiers to their loved ones. They had started with a simple mission: to return lost memories. But now they were witnessing firsthand how those memories transcended time, how the past had shaped the present in ways both seen and unseen. One afternoon they found themselves at Veterans Park, a small but poignant space dedicated to those who had served in wars past. The park was a quiet haven, with benches scattered beneath tall oak trees and a large monument at its center, engraved with the names of fallen soldiers. It had always been a place of reflection for the town, but to the children, it now felt like something more. They had grown to understand that the monuments weren't just markers in stone. They were symbols of the lives, the sacrifices, and the legacies of the soldiers who had given everything for their country. While they sat by the monument, discussing their next steps, Mr. Whitaker, a local historian and former soldier, approached them. He had seen them many times around town, researching and visiting veterans, and had grown curious about their efforts. "Hey there," he said, his voice warm but tinged with the experience of a man who had seen too much. "I've been hearing about your work. You've been digging up some old memories, huh?" Sam looked up, a little surprised. "Yes, sir. We found a time capsule buried by soldiers from the war, and we've been trying to return the items we found to their families." The children were deeply moved by the conversation. For them, patriotism had always seemed like something abstract, something taught in schools and on holidays. But as they listened to Catherine and John speak, they began to understand that true patriotism wasn't something that could be defined by symbols or ceremonies. It was a deeply personal commitment. It was about choosing to give, sometimes at great personal cost, for the greater good of others. It was about remembering and honoring the sacrifices of those who had come before, so that future generations could have the freedom to live their lives. That night, as they sat in silence, reflecting on what they had just learned, Emily spoke with quiet resolve. "We've learned so much, not just about the past, but about how the past still shapes everything today. It's not just about the soldiers who fought. It's about the people they fought for, their families, their friends, the whole country. And it's about remembering what they gave up, even if it was hard." Jake nodded, his mind already racing with the thought of what they could do next. "I think it's time we do something to honor all of them, not just the soldiers but everyone who has kept this country strong. We've learned the true meaning of sacrifice. And now it's our turn to remember." In that moment, the children understood that what they had discovered through this journey was not just a piece of history. It was a responsibility to carry forward the lessons of sacrifice and patriotism, to share the stories of those who had given so much, and to never forget the price of freedom. Their mission was no longer just about returning lost memories. It was about ensuring that the lessons learned through the pain and sacrifice of war would continue to resonate generation after generation. As the children sat together in the quiet of the evening, the weight of their journey fully sank in. What had started as a simple project to return a few lost mementos had transformed into a profound experience, one that had changed the way they saw their world. They had learned about sacrifice, patriotism, and the unbreakable connections between the past and the present. But more than that, they had come to understand the importance of honoring the legacy of those who had come before them. In the weeks following their encounters with the veterans and their families, the children knew they had to do something more than simply return the items from the time capsule. They had to ensure that the lessons they had learned, about sacrifice, loyalty, and love for one's country, would not fade into the background of history. The veterans they had met had given so much for their country, and their stories needed to be heard, remembered, and honored. As they gathered in the town hall one evening, the children shared their idea. They would create a memory wall, a place where people could come to honor the soldiers and veterans of all wars, a place where the stories and sacrifices of the past could be preserved for future generations. The memory wall would feature not just names and dates, but photographs, letters, and personal mementos, each item telling a unique story of courage, love, and sacrifice. It would be a living tribute to the men and women who had given so much, and a reminder to all who passed by that the price of freedom was not something to be taken for granted. The town embraced the idea wholeheartedly. Local businesses donated materials, and volunteers from all corners of the community came together to help create the wall. It became a labor of love, a testament to the unity and strength that was born from a shared history. The veterans who had once been strangers to the children now became integral parts of the project, contributing their stories and memories, helping to ensure that their legacies would live on. On the day the memory wall was unveiled, the town gathered in the park to witness the dedication. The sky was clear, the sun warm, and the air filled with the sounds of people coming together in remembrance. Emily, Sam, Jake, Sophia, and the rest of the children stood at the front, alongside the veterans and their families, feeling a deep sense of pride. They had set out to return a few forgotten items, but now they had created something far more meaningful, a living tribute to the legacy of those who had fought and sacrificed for their country. As the ribbon was cut and the memory wall revealed, the children felt the weight of history settle over them. The past had been honored, but more importantly, it had been connected to the present. They knew that the soldiers' sacrifices were not just a part of a distant past. They were a part of who they were, who their parents were, and who they would be in the future. The lessons of those who had served, lessons of courage, love, and sacrifice, would continue to shape them for years to come. As the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving behind the whispers of stories and memories, the children stood for a moment in front of the wall. They thought about all they had learned, the veterans' stories, the sacrifices made, and the bonds forged through shared experience. They had come to realize that honoring the legacy of those who had gone before wasn't just about preserving the past. It was about living up to the ideals they had fought for. It was about living with purpose, honoring the freedom they had been given, and passing down the stories of those who had made it possible. "This wall," Emily said softly, looking at the names etched into the stone, "isn't just for them. It's for all of us. For everyone who remembers what it means to fight for something greater than yourself. To love your country, to stand by the people you care about, and to never forget the price that was paid." The others nodded in agreement. The legacy of those soldiers, those unsung heroes, was not something to be left in the past. It was something that would live on in their hearts, in their actions, and in the way they carried forward the lessons of sacrifice, courage, and patriotism. They knew that, in honoring this legacy, they would be ensuring that the past would never be forgotten, and that the future would always carry with it the spirit of those who had given everything. And as the sun set over the memory wall, casting long shadows over the names of those who had served, the children felt a quiet but powerful sense of peace. They had completed their mission, but more importantly, they had learned that the true mission was one that would never end. It was a mission to remember, to honor, and to carry forward the legacy of all those who had made sacrifices for the freedoms they held dear. Their journey had come full circle, and they knew that, from that day forward, they would continue to honor the legacy of those who had paved the way for them. It was a responsibility they would carry with pride for the rest of their lives.